Welcome to the deep dive. We're diving into fourfold fields of quantum dreams. And wow, that title alone, it really grabs you, doesn't it?
It's a fascinating paper. Yeah, it really delves into perception, how our minds are structured, even the nature of learning.
So they start off talking about this quantum baseball team and their spring training, but instead of, the physical stuff, it's all about perception and thought. Have you ever experienced that, like that mental prep for something new?
Oh, absolutely. That sense of anticipation,
Mm.
it's really important for learning. The paper argues that just like athletes need training, our minds, they need to be ready for complex situations.
Yeah.
And to kind of get that point across, they use this analogy of someone looking at a squat rack, just a normal squat rack in a gym.
Okay, a squat rack. Got it. But why is that such a key image for them?
Well, what's interesting is they're not really focused on the squat rack itself, but more what it represents, a framework. So think of it like this. You've got the squat rack. It has its own structure, but you can use it in different ways depending on how you adjust the pins.
Right, right. You can adjust it for different exercises, heights, you name it.
Mhm.
So they're saying our minds also have these kinds of frameworks.
Exactly. These mental frameworks, they shape how we see the world, how we interact with it.
Yeah.
Just like that squat rack guides your movements when you're, actually working out. But here's where it gets even more interesting, I think. They talk about the gap between the parts of the squat rack, those spaces between the bar.
The gaps. Okay, now you've got me. What's so important about the empty space?
What they're highlighting is that those gaps, those spaces between the more defined structures, they can be barriers or are opportunities. It all comes down to how we choose to see them.
So it's like the space between those bars, maybe you could use it for storage, but only if you see that as a possibility. It's all about how we interpret what we're seeing.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It's this interplay between that fixed structure, the squat rack of our minds, and then our own flexible interpretations, how we use those gaps. And that's what makes it such a dynamic process, I think.
It's almost like those optical illusions, where you can see two different images depending on how you're focusing. Makes you realize how much our perspective shapes what we perceive in the first place. And actually, speaking of perspective, they bring in this whole idea of moon cycles to explain how our viewpoint changes what we see of the rack. Sounds a little abstract at first. What's the connection there?
Yeah, so that's where they really, uh, I guess, emphasize how much our perspective influences our understanding. Imagine the holes in that squat rack, right? Picture those as faces of the moon. So where you're standing determines how much of each, moon you can see. Basically what they're saying is we can never get the whole picture all at once.
It's like we've all got those blind spots, right?
Yeah.
In our knowledge, I mean, literally and figuratively, we only see so much from where we're standing.
Exactly. And they're challenging us to really be aware of those limitations. They talk about zooming in and zooming out to get a better understanding, a more complete one. We have to engage more actively with the world around us and the information we take in.
So how do these moon cycles and gaps fit into this bigger idea of quantum dreams and fourfold fields? I mean, those are some pretty abstract concepts. How do they connect back to this squat rack idea? So we're talking about quantum dreams and fourfold fields. Are those like the fields in this gym we're talking about? What does it even mean to have a quantum dream?
That's a great question. It's where the authors, they kind of connect those metaphorical dots. They're saying that, like with the squat rack, our minds interact with all these different fields of information, perception, how we experience things. And those fields, they're shaped by those frameworks, the ones we've been talking about.
So our mental frameworks, it's like the settings on our mental equipment, and they filter how we see everything.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where they bring in those concepts from quantum physics, like you mentioned earlier.
Okay, quantum physics. Love it. But you might have to, walk me through this one. How does quantum physics play into how we learn?
Okay, so think about this. In quantum physics, just the act of observing something can actually change how particles behave. It's not that things are random, really. It's more like there's this uncertainty that's just built into reality.
Okay, I think I'm following. So instead of learning being this straight line, where we're just getting facts one after another, it's more like things are fluid, they change as we learn, just like in that quantum world where things aren't always so clear.
Yes, exactly. It's about like accepting that uncertainty, that things are ambiguous sometimes, and realizing that what we understand is always evolving.
Yeah.
There's not really an endpoint to learning. Just like those quantum particles, they never really stay in one place for very long.
So it's not about getting those right answers. It's about being okay with not knowing and realizing that those right answers, they might actually change as we learn more. That's a pretty big change, I think, for a lot of people.
It is, it can be really challenging, but the paper argues that this way of learning, this embracing the uncertainty, it's really important, especially nowadays in such a fast-changing world. We can't rely on these fixed ideas or outdated knowledge when everything around us is constantly in motion.
So it's not about just what we know, it's more about how we adapt to what we don't know yet. How we approach those gaps in our understanding, those spaces between the bars, like on that squat rack.
You got it. And that's where their focus on functions comes back in. Remember we talked about how those gaps could be barriers or they could be opportunities?
Right, right. Depending on how we see them, what we decide to do with them.
Exactly. The authors are suggesting that learning is really about making new functions in those gaps. We connect the dots, we find new ways that ideas relate, and we build meaning out of all the information that's swirling around us.
So we're building these mental bridges, kind of, to cross those gaps. And when we do that, we understand more.
I like that analogy. That's great. And, the more bridges we build, the more our thinking becomes adaptable, resilient. But it's not just about adding more information. It's about really examining what we think we already know. Remember those moon cycles and how where we're standing changes what we see.
Absolutely. We could look at the same thing over and over, but until we change our perspective, we might miss something really important. So, learning is also about recognizing our own biases, our own limits, and being willing to get out of our comfort zone so we can see things in new ways.
You're exactly right. They really emphasize zooming in and zooming out, seeing the little details, but also the bigger picture at the same time, and remembering that we all have blind spots, things we just can't see from where we're standing at the moment. So we have to be open to the fact that there's always going to be more to learn, more to find out.
It's like those optical illusions again. Sometimes you have to shift your focus completely to get the full picture. It really makes you realize how much what we assume is true can shape our whole reality.
And that's where their idea of quantum dreams, it takes on this whole other meaning, I think. It's not just about accepting that we can't know everything for sure, but it's about getting excited about what we don't know, the thrill of figuring things out.
It's like we're constantly dreaming up new possibilities, new ways of seeing how things work. That's a powerful image. But they don't just leave us in this abstract world of quantum dreams, do they? It seems like there's a practical side to all of this, too.
You're right. The authors, they give us some tools to actually use these ideas.
Okay, good, because this is all really interesting, but I want to know how it translates into real life, how we can actually use these ideas.
Right, so that's where their last section comes in. They call it game time. And they give us some really interesting strategies for applying these ideas to how we live.
Game time. I like it. Sounds intense. What's the game? How do we play?
They're suggesting that life itself is the game, and that this whole quantum dreaming approach, this ability to adapt to change, that's the key to dealing with how complex everything is. And they use that gym metaphor, again, to show these strategies.
So we're back in the gym, it's game time, but we've moved on from that squat rack, haven't we? It feels bigger now somehow.
Yeah, it's like we were focused on one piece of equipment, and now we're looking at the whole gym, the whole, I guess, playing field. They want us to think about the larger field of knowledge of all the experiences we have.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. So it's not enough to just get these mental frameworks. We have to actually know how to move around in this field in a way that works.
Exactly. They're saying we need to be like active participants in this game of understanding. We're not just, lifting weights here. We're training for something much bigger, something where the rules are always changing and the possibilities are kind of endless. It's like that quantum dreams idea again, that sense that anything is possible.
It's exciting, but also, I don't know, maybe a little scary, knowing there's always more to learn, always more to discover. So how do we even start to train for something like that? What are the most important skills we need to be better players in this game?
Well, they give us three main strategies, and they relate each one back to the gym. First, they talk about perspective. Remember how, depending on where you are in the gym, you literally see things differently.
Right, like those blind spots. We could be looking right at something and not even see it, depending on our position.
Exactly. So in this game, knowing our own biases, what we're limited by, that's super important. We've got to be willing to change our perspective, to look at things from different angles, to make sure we're not just seeing what we expect to see.
So it's like we have to make a point of walking around the gym, seeing everything from all sides, instead of just staying in the same spot.
I like that. And that leads right into their second strategy, adaptability. Remember we were talking about adjusting the squat rack for different exercises, how you can get different functions out of the same structure.
Right, just moving those pins around totally changes how you use it.
Exactly. And in the same way, our thinking has to be flexible, adaptable when we get new information or when situations change. It's about being willing to change our mental models, to try a different approach when we need to, because in this game, if you're stuck with old information, rigid ways of thinking, you're going to fall behind.
So it's not just about having the right answers, it's about being able to find new answers when the old ones don't work anymore.
Exactly. Which brings us to that third strategy, function. Remember, a squat rack on its own, it doesn't really do anything right. It's a structure or a framework, but we're the ones who decide how to use it, what we're going to create within that structure.
So for this game, it's not enough to just understand the rules, the frameworks of knowledge. We need to use those frameworks in creative ways to get what we want. We have to be able to create, to build, to make something totally new.
That's it. You got it. It's about bridging those gaps in what we understand, finding new connections between things that seem totally different. And that's where the whole quantum thing comes back in.
Okay, remind me how this connects to quantum dreaming and fourfold fields.
It's about like really leaning into that uncertainty, the unknown, and letting that push us to be more creative, to grow. Remember, those fourfold fields represent these landscapes, always shifting, of information and everything we experience. And as we're moving through those fields, we're constantly looking, trying to understand, creating new meanings.
So we're all quantum dreamers then, in a way, always shaping and reshaping how we see the world.
Exactly. And the more we embrace that, the more adaptable we become, the more resilient, the more creative. It's this never-ending journey of, like, exploration. And sometimes the most amazing things we discover are the things we never even thought to look for.
Wow, this has really been, I don't know, a workout for my brain in the best way possible. I'm definitely walking away thinking about learning in a totally new way. It's not just memorizing facts, it's about learning how to learn, how to adapt, how to create something new. This has been an awesome deep dive.
It really has. It's about approaching life like an active game, with all the good and the bad that come with that. And remembering that the most important thing we can train is our own minds.
So true. Thanks for joining me on this incredible journey into these fourfold fields of quantum dreams. And for our listeners, keep those mental squat wraps adjusted and those quantum dreams alive. Until next time, keep exploring.